Consolidation and land inequality. We have a set of 5 really exciting talks today, but before we start those, I just wanted to start with a small introduction of kind of the inspiration, motivation of this session. So I would say the genesis for this session actually started at the last GLP in Bern, where I discussed with several colleagues about the importance of land ownership and its distribution. In particular, I had many of those conversations with Dr. Kendra McSweeney. Thanks for coming, Kendra. And Kendra actually wrote a really great article after that conference called Who Owns Earth? And I think that is still a really important research agenda, though one that I would argue is perhaps a little understudied in land system science. We find ourselves in a moment when inequality is increasing in multiple dimensions, including land. To give you some context, 10% of wealthy rural producers operate 60% of agricultural land, whereas 50% of the poorest farmers operate 3% of agricultural land. Changing land ownership and distribution holds many implications for food security, climate, concentration of power, human health, all things that we care about as land system scientists. And so I'd argue the theme of land ownership and distribution inequality lands smack dab in the middle of land system science, though it's one that requires us to get a bit outside of our methodological comfort zone. We can't, to a certain degree, remote sensing and satellites are really limited in telling us this kind of information about land ownership, land inequality. And so this session is motivated by these needs to understand this phenomena, but also methods and ways to understand land inequality, land ownership with different methods, different approaches. And so we have a really nice set of interdisciplinary talks today, and we will. I won't introduce anymore, and I'll kick it off with our first speaker, Christian Levers, on land system polarization.
Yeah. Is that working? Yeah. So, thanks so much. Thanks so much for the kind introduction. My name is Christian Levers. I'm a senior scientist at the Thünen Institute of Biodiversity in Germany. And as you can see from the title, my talk will not be so much about land consolidation inequality, but it's about land system polarization or land use polarization. However, land consolidation can be seen as an example process that can lead to land system polarization, as I can hopefully make clear over the next couple of slides. To set the stage, what is polarization? And I don't know if you're all familiar with that term, but I looked it up at the Merriam-Webster, and it's the process of development into 2 sharply distinct opposites. So keep that in mind during the talk. So we are talking about a process going into 2 different and sharply distinct opposites. And why is that important for land use science or land system science? Many land use change processes are polarizing. That's my take. For instance, the classic example is we have abandonment, for instance, in the upper slopes of mountainous regions, and we have intensification in the valleys, and those regions could be then seen as polarizing in terms of production. But also, this term has been used a lot over the last years. We're not going into details if we like this land sharing, land sparing dichotomy or not. But what it does do is that it describes a process with increasing intensity in some areas while reducing the pressure, the extent, for instance, of cropland in other areas. So this would be the land sparing part. So we have 2 different opposing processes with respect to a cropping system in this case. And why this is important? Polarization trends or processes that constitute polarization have impacts and trade-offs. And who receive these as positive or negative depends on the target system and actors affected. And when I say system, we come back to that in a couple of slides. The boundary setting is always important and will be important for the stuff that I will show over the next couple of slides. But going back, and that is tying now to the session topic, we can think of consolidation. We see consolidation trends in agriculture they are quite widespread globally. And they're rearranging, readjusting agricultural landscapes, and that could be a sign of polarization. For instance, if we see a region where we have consolidated farms becoming bigger, but at the same time in other parts of a larger region, farms are becoming smaller. So we have these two opposing trends. And how this links to inequality is, for instance, consolidation can be beneficial for some because it's more efficient, the production cost can be lowered, but at the same time it can be detrimental for others by unequal distribution of benefits from land. Okay, that was a little bit of an introduction. To summarize, land system polarization, as I understand it, is a land change trajectory, or can be land change trajectories in opposite directions. They can be multidimensional. We have already seen two indicators, intensity and area, and multi-scale, operate across multiple areas, geographies, and timescales. So it's a complex process. We have heard about complex processes quite a bit over the last couple of days. And it's a key global process shaping the transformation of landscapes. However, unfortunately, we don't really know where polarization plays out at the moment. Because first, we lack a conceptual framework, how to map it and how to frame it. And then what this means is it hinders the assessment of potential drivers and impacts that polarization can come about. So this is what the next couple of slides are summarizing the thought process that my co-authors and I were having over the last actually couple of years in conceptualizing and mapping polarization trends. So this is a manuscript still under construction, so I'm really looking forward to your comments and suggestions in the Q&A afterwards. Keep in mind, and I'm coming back now to the boundary setting. Right now, it is, how we see it here is that we conceptualize and map polarization trends based on spatially explicit area-wide indicators of land use change. So that means we are largely neglecting the social dimensions and other non-measurable features. Keep it in mind. Although I would like to indicate that this concept can of course be adapted and expanded in case app data is available. So what we propose are 5 key indicator groups. These are example indicator groups of indicators that we can map across space and time on a landscape scale. Pertaining to area, for instance, the extent of cropping areas, intensity, yields, nitrogen input, and so on. The diversity, for instance, the crop diversity, structure, here it comes back to the consolidation issue, like farm size distribution or field sizes, as well as the spatial patterns, so measures of concentration, dispersion of the previous 4 indicators. But the whole process, it's not so simple then to collect indicators and map them, because we can think of polarization when what I call like a within indicator polarization. It means we have an administrative unit, for instance, and we have a part, say in the north, where cropland expands, and in the south where it contracts. So we have this polarization within that single indicator, which is cropland extent. We can also think about a between indicator polarization, when, for instance, have a decrease in area and an increase in intensity, what we have seen before when we talked about land sparing. To make it more complex, we can think about polarization within a single sector. Here we have an example for cropping sector, but also between 2 sectors, for instance, in intensification in cropping systems and the de-intensification in pastoral systems. And to make it even more complex, we can think about the observational units themselves. For instance, here we see 2 distant units. An indicator, let's say cropping intensity, is increasing in the left unit and decreasing in the right unit. There's no polarization. However, if these regions are coupled, telecoupling straight, we have heard about that as well, we could think that if there is a process that connects these 2 regions thematically, that we can actually say the increase in one area is related to the decrease in the other. And we see that, for instance, with the cropland decrease in Europe and the increase in cropland extent in South America, for instance. Okay, so how to map it? First, I'm not going to go too much into detail here. Please come back to me after the talk. Data homogenization, aggregation, and defining of the apt spatial scale to map polarization. And the important part is because we need time series, we need some sort of trend. And you can do basic robust trends and go more fancy as you like, but important is we need a spatial trend of the indicators that we have at hand. The third step is that we actually map hotspots of increase and decrease. Can be either quantile-driven or standard deviation-driven. You can choose any method you would like. And then in the end, we aggregate those hotspots to the next spatial scale. Why do we do that? Because we need a specific threshold, and I'll come back to this in a second, beyond which we deem a region undergoing polarization. Okay, let me show you a quick example. We did that for the EU cropping system. We collected data on, unfortunately, not all 5 dimensions I proposed, because we didn't have the structure data, so farm size data in a sufficient temporal and spatial resolution. So we look at intensity, accident diversity, and the spatial patterns. All of this comes from a Mehrabi database, and we have a 12-year time frame in 2-year intervals. Right. To start off with, and to make it a little bit more simple, because this whole analysis can become quite complex, we fix the sector, so we're only looking at cropping systems. We also fix a spatial unit. That means we're only looking at within cropland and within, in this case, NUTS2, which is the nomenclature of terrestrial units in the European Union, of polarization within these 2 dimensions. But we look at between indicator polarization. We have seen that already. Within indicator polarization and the spatial patterns. That means if we see trends of dispersion or concentration. Okay, and this is the map that comes out. If we do this, I'm not going to explain all the geographies and the spatial patterns of the indicator combinations or the polarization combinations, but I would like to show to you is that polarization is widespread across Europe. And the second key result is that there are many different types of combinations of polarization. And I have a bunch of maps in the annex, which can be used to really go into detail and see, okay, which indicators are actually polarizing in which regions. When we think about the within indicator type, we can also look at what indicators are actually polarizing when we look at the between indicator polarization type. So we can really do a nice characterization of these regions, which is then of course important when we want to look into what were the drivers of these patterns and also what are the potential impacts of these patterns. And I promised you to come back to the threshold. So this map is based on a minimum threshold of 5%. So each of these NUTS regions has at least 5% hotspots of increase of the indicator and decrease. So we have these opposing directions of change. If we change that, lower the threshold, of course we become more inclusive. That means basically all of Europe would be undergoing polarization in that sense. If we become a little bit more conservative, increasing that threshold, so demanding at least 10% each, the patterns become a little bit sparse. So the whole exercise is quite dependent on where you set the threshold. So sensitivity analysis is important, and communicating the results based on this is key as well. All right, what can you take home from my talk? 1. Polarization is a useful lens, I think, to study complex lens systems and changes therein. It's complementary to existing frameworks in lens system science, as I hope I could show you. A better understanding polarization impacts puts us in a situation to support land use and land use planning and decision making. And last but not least, I already mentioned that the whole framework or concept is actually adaptable, scalable, and transferable to tailor it to the research needs that you have for your individual case study region. That means if you're really interested in polarization, for instance, in smaller areas, you can expand the indicator groups, the key dimensions that you can use to map polarization in your study region. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy for any questions you have.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Christian. Do we have any questions for Christian Levers? Yeah, got a couple over there. Go for you first.
Thanks so much. That was really interesting. Can you go back to the map slide you had of your results? Okay. Can you explain to me again, the intuition behind between within polarization? I mean, I would just love to hear a little bit more about the mechanisms and what does that mean? Can you tell me a story about where it's happening? So Spain, or I don't know. Can you? I want a little more intuition behind what this means.
Very good question. So
that interpretation.
Yeah, sure. From the technical point of view, it is the between and within is allowing you to not only focus on so many of these assessments looking into change, hotspots of change of a single indicator. But then we kind of neglect that we actually have opposing processes of indicators that might be coupled, like expansion and intensification are thematically coupled. And this is what I call between indicator polarization, because then you can actually unravel that. The second part of your question, that's still work in progress. These maps are, I think I made them 2 or 3 weeks ago, so I haven't really got into the interpretation of that. Sorry. Okay. So please take along, look out for the paper. I hope to submit it later this year.
Okay, thanks.
This is really cool, Christian. Thank you for this talk. And you already took one of my questions that I had, but I have another one. And this is more, so why is it that we have in France, for example, some regions without any polarization and probably most of the country, the other way around, some regions with a lot of polarization and most of the country without any? Why?
If you read my paper on archetypes of land use of land systems in Europe, you will have an answer to that, because France actually the cropping system is quite stable. There's not much happening, and those were also regions that I mapped almost 8 years ago, mapped as basically the stable archetypes, and that really nicely comes out here as well. As I said, I have to dig deeper, also conceptualize or decomposing this a little bit more into looking what indicators are actually changing. This is just a summary graph to show to you. I will need to see.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Christian. If you join me in giving him another round of applause. Brilliant presentation on processes. It's brilliant. Yeah. Next up, we have our very own Jonathan Sullivan on large-scale land acquisitions exacerbating local farm inequalities in Tanzania.
Okay, thank you for everyone being here. So I'm going to present some work from my dissertation on large-scale land acquisitions. That's a jargony word. What does that mean? Ultimately, what we're really talking about are changes in land tenure, and typically land that is held in common, that is then purchased by investors, often in collaboration with the state, that can end up in lots of displacement and dispossession of land. And so when we talk about large-scale land acquisitions, or also sometimes referred to as land grabs, we should recognize that this is not new. This is something that has happened in many places throughout history. We can go back to, for example, the Enclosure Acts in England that displaced common pastoralists for elites to take that land, and then at the same time create a labor force. And so this isn't necessarily a new phenomenon, but something certainly that has gathered new attention and momentum in the 21st century. Following the food crisis in 2008, there was lots of interest in land by foreign investors. And so this graph here is showing an increase in these types of acquisitions and investments, typically in the global south, where land governance tends to be weak, where lots of land tends to be held in common. And so we have lots of risks and vulnerabilities here in terms of land displacement or dispossession. And the key, I would say, development narrative that this relates to is something called agricultural transformation. And what agricultural transformation is this concept that the increase in yields can reduce poverty over time. Okay, and so we see this example that happened in Southeast Asia. It's also happened in the United States and Europe, where we have large increases in yields over time and we see reductions in poverty. The concept is that when you have an agrarian society, greater yields, higher incomes, higher expenditures throughout the economy, greater job opportunities outside of agriculture, this virtuous cycle that keeps going. And where we see this in places where yield hasn't increased and been stagnant for a number of years, like sub-Saharan Africa, we don't see sort of improvements to poverty. Right. I would say this is a canonical theory in economics. Okay. Agricultural economists say in review articles, the only way to address poverty is through agricultural transformation. This is an enormous narrative throughout the world, often held by agricultural economists. Okay? But There's lots and lots of work, I think, from some really great ethnographers, anthropologists, many of whom work in Tanzania, where this work is situated, that talk about the social differentiation that occurs as a result of agricultural transformation and through this process of changing land tenure and land rights. Manuel Sule, who's a great Tanzanian researcher, talks about who wins and who loses out. It depends on the moral and the local political economy. Right? This depends on politics, who's going to benefit from agricultural transformation and large-scale land acquisitions. Farmland investments tend to consolidate existing local processes of differentiation. Right? We're already building on existing inequalities and potentially worsening those. Okay, so we have this one side that's talking about differentiation, another side that's talking about, well, if we invest, if we bring in new companies that can control large pieces of land, they're going to improve yield, they're going to address poverty. Okay. So this is, and so this is where our research is situated. We want to understand how is land inequality responding to these investments in large-scale land acquisitions. Inequality is important for lots of reasons. Right? Where there's greater land inequality, we tend to see lower agricultural productivity, greater agricultural expansion, obviously worse income inequality, and importantly, where there's high levels of land inequality, land reform becomes ineffective. Right? Our attempts to actually have progressive reform and redistribute land tend to be ineffective. Right? So once we go down this path, it's really hard to return. So our research questions within this study are, how is local land inequality responding to land grabs or large-scale land acquisitions? What are the key mechanisms that are explaining that land inequality? And what are the well-being implications from large-scale land acquisitions that are driven through increases or changes to land inequality? So this was some field work that I did in Tanzania over the course of my dissertation. To get at these questions, we collected a large household survey surrounding 4 large-scale land acquisitions in Tanzania. Had an amazing research team who collected thousands of household surveys, and that helped me manage all the travel across Tanzania. These are the 4 different sites where we collected household surveys, and importantly, we differentiated these sites into quote-unquote treatment sites, so those that have experienced changes in land tenure, land grabs, and those that are far away from the occurrence of these changes in land tenure, and therefore sort of are not part of villages that are forfeiting land to large investors. And importantly, we stratified our sample across groups of wealth. And so the method that we use to understand inequality builds off of causal inference. And typically what we're trying to do in causal inference is compare 2 distributions and the average effects within those distributions. Okay? So in yellow, where there's a large-scale land acquisition, and blue, where there isn't one. And from that, we extract an average effect. Sometimes your data, right, if it overlaps, we're going to find no effect. But sometimes your data might have a strange distribution to it. Yet the average, right, isn't moving in this case, and so we might say, well, there's no effect of these large-scale land acquisitions. But within this distribution, there's actually really useful information. So we can use something called quantile regression, where we actually compare the quantiles, these groups, to then come up with treatment effects across these quantiles. So we can say, what's the effect of those in the 25th percentile of land holdings, farm ownership, 50th percentile, 75th. Okay? And so we do this analysis using farm sizes and land holdings. For the sake of time, there's an equation. If you have questions about the methodology, I'm happy to talk about it. And so this is what we see. So this first panel relates to farm size, and compares treatment and control sites. And what we basically see is there's no difference between these 2 sites prior to a large-scale land acquisition occurring. But once we collect data after that large-scale land acquisition, we see that the lower end of this distribution changes. Those below the 35th percentile are ones that have smaller and smaller pieces of land. They're becoming displaced, systematically displaced, and dispossessed, and appear unable to sort of buy back in or get back into farmland ownership and management. Okay? So this is sort of the part of the graph I'm focusing on here. Right. We also look at land holdings, and we don't see quite as strong of a relationship. Okay, but again, sort of the lower end of the quantiles are suggestive of a similar process in terms of land inequality. Okay, so we can say after these large changes in tenure occur, we're seeing worse and worse land inequality. Okay, we looked at a number of mechanisms, but one that I'll focus on is the price of land. We collected a survey from the World Bank called the Living Standards Measurement Survey, and it has one really important question in it, which says, if you were to sell your land today, for how much would that be? Okay, and we can then measure the distance from a large-scale land acquisition. And what we find is that the price of land declines for every kilometer that you move away from a large-scale land acquisition. Land is more expensive around land grabs. Okay, I can't say if land grabs sort of created this because we don't have data prior to that occurrence of when these investments occurred. But we can sort of look at this association, and it tells us that if you are displaced from land, if you don't get any remuneration from the government in terms of cash or any other types of remuneration, you're going to have a harder time buying back in, renting back into farmland. And then the final thing we find is we look specifically at a variety of well-being measures, so total income, wealth, a multidimensional poverty index, food insecurity. Have these things worsened for the entire set of households surrounding large-scale land acquisitions, or has it worsened for just those that have been dispossessed? So in green, we see that in no dimension of well-being have improvements been generated by these investments. And that's for everyone that's around large-scale land acquisitions. Whereas in the orange, these are groups, families, households that have been dispossessed or displaced from their land. And we can see in many dimensions, wealth, multidimensional poverty, food insecurity, we see worse well-being outcomes for these groups. So what we have here is sort of a systematic displacement and dispossession of the poorest households within these regions, and they bear the brunt of these impacts from land acquisitions. Okay. So we can say that large-scale land acquisitions redistribute land, land price being one really important mechanism. There's numerous negative well-being outcomes, and if we don't consider inequality or distribution effects, right, we're going to miss a lot of what's going on in these types of investments. And I'll finish with something sort of more high level within land system science. I think there's some interesting review articles out there that are really suggesting that our attention to land inequality is insufficient. Right? We talk about injustice, we talk about inequality, but our ability to discuss, measure, assess how these distributions are changing, I think it still remains limited. And I hope this is sort of one example that we can use to get better detail on these processes. Okay. Thank you to my co-authors. If you're interested in the article that came out of this, here's a QR code. And of course, thank you to the funders for this work. Thank you.
So that's fantastic. Thanks ever so much, Jonathan. On a study that's taking these ideas and these claims and this kind of anecdotes and actually going on the ground and actually putting forward the evidence of actually what's happening. Any questions for? Yep, Jonathan, go on.
Hi, thanks for the excellent work and the excellent presentation as well. So I really appreciate this line of work that you show to us now. I was interested in your thoughts on processes that may intermingle with what you observe on the ground, relating the scale of the farming operations. So the idea is to discriminate basically large-scale land acquisitions from everything else, but within the spectrum of everything else, there's like small-scale, purely or semi-subsistence farming. There are maybe medium-scale farming operations that could be emerging or already present also in your data. And I would be just curious to hear what your thoughts are on this, if you observe these types of commercial, medium-scale farming operations on the ground, or not at all, if you saw them emerging. Could you register spillovers maybe in a more qualitative fashion in your fieldwork or in your data?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it was dependent, and I mean, we only have 4 sites here, so in that sense, sort of at a higher level, our sample is limited. But one of them included a contract farming program, so farmers could buy into this program and sell, in this case, sugarcane to the producer for a set price. And that is definitely a place where medium scale farming was being generated. In the results that I showed you about land distribution or land inequality, and we saw sort of effects on the lower side, there were suggestive effects that there's an increase on the sort of upper quantiles. We had a smaller sample for large-scale landowners because there's less. So we can't really say anything definitive statistically about sort of that process, but the data suggested that also.
Thank you. Very interesting. I didn't read the paper yet, but I will. Just one clarifying question. What is the time span between the initial collection and the after treatment? And what would be your guess? I'm not sure if you're coming back to the field to collect more data in a different time period. What would be your guess moving forward in terms of inequality? Is there any gut feeling in terms of trend of inequality?
That's a great question. So the time difference, it depends on the site, but it's anywhere between 8 to 12 years, which is a long time. And we're asking families and households to recall 8 or 12 years ago. We connected those with not just the event of the large-scale land acquisition itself, but elections that happened that year, things that you could sort of connect to. And then we obviously focus on things that are, I think, very material to households: land, farmland, you own, land ownership. And then finally, we actually compared, we did a follow-up survey and compared differences of basically an error of how households are remembering how much farmland they owned 2 years ago. And there's definitely error, there's noise there, but the error is the same between the treatment and control sites. So in essence, they cancel each other out. In terms of a follow-up survey, I would love to do one. It's kind of hard to guess. There's some really strange dynamics happening. For example, one of these large-scale land acquisitions has shut down and no longer exists. So what happens when that happens? I don't know. So I won't proffer a guess, but I think a follow-up survey would be really important.
Hi, thank you for the fantastic talk. Different kind of question. I noticed you used the term large-scale land acquisitions in your title, but throughout the talk you're talking about land grabs. And I wonder if you have any reflections on the agency of the terminology, because it strikes me that giving it this quite corporate neutral wording could help to kind of justify or neutralize what's maybe often quite a violent act, and give I don't know, the agricultural economists ways to talk about it that allow it to continue. And just wonder if you have any thoughts on that kind of.
Yeah. So the International Land Coalition defines land grabs, and there's a long list of components. I might miss a few, but they're not transparent. They often violate human rights. They're not free. They don't have informed free prior consent. They're not transparent. They do not follow environmental or economic laws within the country. It's a long list, and it's a little bit difficult to go confirm each of those and say, okay, now this meets a definition of land grabs. And so I agree, large-scale land acquisitions is a softening of that term, partially because I go interview managers of these farms, and it's difficult to say, tell me about your land grab. And so I had a great mentor at the University of Michigan, and she said, this quote that I love, if it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And I think in many cases here we're talking, yes, large-scale land acquisitions and land grabs. Some of these processes are going on. It's harder to define each. Hopefully we can sort of jump between those definitions and be honest about what's happening. Do agricultural economists sort of use this softer term to create a narrative? I don't know. I think Jan has a great talk on moral economies and narratives around investment, so I'll push that one to Jan.
Okay, brilliant. We have a number of other questions, including, from Tanzanians in the audience too, and so you're going to have a number of questions at the end coming up to you, I think. But thanks so much, Jonathan, for that. Brilliant. Thanks. Yeah. Next up, we have Carlo speaking to us on distant interactions and environmental justice in the production of mezcal in Mexico, a systematic review.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. My name is Carlos Aguilar, and I am going to talk about distant interactions and equity in the production of agave mezcal in Mexico, a systematic review. I am a PhD student in sustainability science, and I did this work with my two supervisors, Luis Gibronet and Maria Jose Barrola. And well, what do we know about agave mezcal? You know, mezcal, we already know that it is a alcoholic beverage. It is a distillate. We know that it comes from agave or maguey. We know a lot of things about mezcal. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but it is very popular now. But when we started to do this work, we found three characteristics that we found really interesting about mezcal, and these are those. So mezcal is an artisanal product, and it is not completely industrialized. So this is in contrast, for example, with the tequila, which is completely industrialized. Mezcal, it is an artisanal product. And we know now that national and international demand is generating more industrialization processes in the cooking, in the fermentation, in the distillation. And this is creating less sustainable processes. So, for example, this is the planted area of agave mezcalero in Mexico. From the 2000 to 2023, the planted area of mezcal has increased by 20,000 hectares. And this is resulting in impacts for small producers, the demand, and especially in the lack of equity in the benefits. So these two characteristics, the last two characteristics, were the starting point of our review. So this is a research question that we have. What distant interactions? We didn't want to put only demand, because that is some kind of constraint. We wanted to know all the distant interactions that impact the productive systems of agave mezcal in Mexico, and what are the implications to sustainability, especially to equity. For this, we use two different frameworks. For the distant interactions, we use the telecoupling framework, which is focused on socio-ecological systems, and it has a focus on distant interactions. So this is important because we think of the productive systems of mezcal as open to flows and open to interactions to other socio-ecological systems. And for implications to equity, we use this environmental justice framework that is developing now, but we focus on three dimensions, which is distribution, procedural, and recognition. And well, right now it has been said that these two frameworks are complementary. So the telecoupling framework can promote the multiscalar focus in environmental conflicts when scientists use the environmental justice framework, and the environmental justice can promote or can move forward in the normative aspect of telecoupling framework and can politicize that telecoupling framework. So it has been said that they are complementary. So the methodology we do, it was a systematic review following the Prisma methodology. We ended up with 44 records with a thematic analysis with categories and questions using the telecoupling framework and the environmental justice framework that were previously developed. We use these three categories. For the telecoupling, we searched for flows, which were divided in material, people, economic, and information. The causes, which were socioeconomic, politic, and environmental, and also the effects were the same. And for the environmental justice, we divided in these three dimensions, which is the distributive justice, that were divided in benefit sharing and burdens compensation. The procedural justice were divided in decision-making satisfaction, access to information, access to conflict resolution mechanisms, and prior informed consent. And recognition justice were divided in cultural identity, local knowledge, and land rights. So I don't want to spend too much methodology, but this was the methodology we used. So these are the results. We found very interesting things. These are the flows that connect the productive systems of mezcal in Mexico to other places. So there are material economic flows. Of course, these are not all the material economic flows, but these are the ones we found in the records. So there are flows of mezcal that goes from Mexico to mainly the United States, Canada, Europe, Singapore, and Argentina. There are people flows, and this is interesting. There are migrants flows between Mexico and the United States when the productive systems become ready-table. There are migrants that go from the United States to the productive systems in Mexico, but when they don't become ready-able, they come back to the United States. And also we found that there are flow students that go from Mexico to Europe to commercialize the mezcal. They go to Europe, they study there, and they found people that want mezcal, that they come back to Mexico, and they trade mezcal to the people that they know there. That was very interesting. We found economic flows. Of course, there are money sent from people that live in the United States, families of the people of the productive systems in the United States that send money to Mexico and the productive systems. And there are information flows. So, of course, there are these international exhibitions of producers that go from these productive systems in Mexico to the United States and to Japan. And we found this. There are objections. There is a normative right now that wanted to change the percentage of agave in mezcal. So the mezcal has to be made from 100% of agave sugars. But there was one normative that wanted to change that because, for example, the tequila can be made from 51% of tequila agave. And they wanted to do the same thing with mezcal, but there were objections from a lot of countries to stop that. And these are the flows that we found inside of Mexico. These in green are all the states that are producers of mezcal. Of course, there are mezcal flow from Oaxaca, Guerrero, Guanajuato, Michoacán, and Puebla, which are states in Mexico, to Mexico City. Of course, Mexico City is the main consumer of mezcal, so the main flows of mezcal go to Mexico City. There are people flows. This was very interesting. We found that tequila producers travel from Jalisco, which is in the west of Mexico, to Oaxaca in search of agave. So they want to make tequila from agave of Oaxaca. There are neo-rural producers from Mexico City that see an opportunity to plant agave and to make mezcal that go from Mexico City to these productive areas in Oaxaca. And there are migrants, the same dynamic. Migrants from Oaxaca to Mexico City that go back and forth. There are these economic flows. Federal money, of course. The federal money goes from the government to support Oaxaca for development of the productive systems. And very interesting, information flows. There are mechanization processes of the tequila producers in Jalisco that interchange their knowledge to the producers of Oaxaca to make more efficient the mechanization processes of the mezcal. This can be good. Well, I don't know. But there are also modernization processes, knowledge from research centers, especially in the metropolitan area of Mexico City. There are institutions, there are universities that interchange this information that they found, and they want to make this modernization process of mezcal in Oaxaca, Guerrero, and San Luis Potosí. So yeah, we found these flows, and these were the socio-ecological causes that we found. At the end of every sentence, these are the records that mention this cause. So of course, the main one was the demand of agave and mezcal. These are the main cause of the productive growing of mezcal and agave. But there are also, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'm going to mention the ones that I found very interesting. For example, there's the emergent narrative that celebrates the authentic, complex, and mystic. And this is because mezcal has these attributes that we know, It's mystic. There is this kind of like magic that is happening in the productive system. So this is one of the causes that we found. Of course, the determinant of tequila and etc. Apolitic, and I'm gonna make an emphasis in this one. There is the creation of the denomination of origin of mezcal and the growing of this denomination of origin. Of course, that we know that the denomination of origin is originated in the global north in France. I think the champagne was the first denomination of origin ever made. So this was also created in Mexico. And what is happening of the denomination of origin of mezcal is that it's growing. There are states that want to make mezcal and they get into the denomination of origin. But, there are these opposite points that, of course, mezcal is made almost in all the country, but this also makes that industrial mezcal can be made in states that didn't make mezcal before. So yeah, it's kind of like very interesting this cause. And of course, there has to be climatic conditions and soil and agroecological conditions for the crop to grow. Okay. There are these effects, of course, economic growth and job creation. I'm not going to go through all of this, but we found, of course, a lot of environmental effects. Agave over-exploitation, creation of agave monocultures, biodiversity loss. We found a lot of environmental effects that weren't really that positive. So yeah, we found all of these. And to go to the environmental justice aspect, we found very interesting things. So in the distributive justice, we found not so disparate amount of equitable and inequitable aspects. For example, in the benefit sharing, we found positive impacts in the income of producers and the creation of jobs. But there is this disparate income between producers and decreasing income. And there are also, like I told you, exclusion of the benefits to producers outside of the denomination of origin. In the burdens compensation, yes, there are these creation of guelaguetzas. There is existence of local networks to produce agave mezcal. But in the inequitable part, there's lack of technical assistance for producers. In the procedural justice aspect, we found that there is participation of men and women in the production of agave mezcal, and there is also participation of young people in the agave mezcal production. And in the inequitable part, there is this power imbalance that goes and grows towards investors and external companies. And in the access information, there is certification costs that are inaccessible for producers. So if you are in the denomination of origin, you can be certified or not certified, but mostly a lot of producers, they don't want to be certified because it's very expensive. So they can't be named their mezcal. They have to name it Destilado de Agave because it is very expensive to name it mezcal. And the last one is this one, recognition justice. In the cultural identity, yes, the interests of the producers are represented by the social reproduction of the family unit, ethnicity, and roots in their places of origin. And yeah, there is this lack of economic rationality in the mezcal agave production. But there are also these loss of traditional practices. There is loss of local knowledge because of long supply chains. And there is lack of respect for community rules from foreign actors. Yeah, and yeah, we found a lot of implications to equity. And I want to finish with this. So we know that there are flows connecting productive systems of agave mezcal to places outside of Mexico and inside of Mexico. This review shows that there are equitable and inequitable implications to environmental justice in the agave mezcal production systems. So we have to look for these inequitable implications. Not so different amount, but that doesn't mean that the inequitable aspect we have to really check out for them. And one of the most important barriers is the denomination of origin with the respective certification. And yeah, that project now I am currently taking in my PhD is to evaluate the denomination of origin. That is the road I'm taking because I found really interesting that normative and that regulation. Yeah. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Carlo. I felt, in 12 minutes, you imparted so much knowledge, and so
Sorry, it was too much.
No, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's fantastic. I feel like I know so much about mezcal. It's brilliant. Okay, so in the interest of time, we'll take one question, and then if you have any other people have questions, they can come up to you after and ask you. So yeah, I'll come to the back.
Thank you for your presentation. It's so interesting. Jennifer Devine, nice to meet you. I'm very much interested in this topic as well. So I have two questions. You can answer either one.
Okay.
The first one relates to how we conceptualize sustainability. And I'm interested if you've talked to indigenous producers, mezcaleros, about what they identify as sustainability challenges, if they talk about it that way, how it might differ from the literature. And two, I'm fascinated with the big marcas that are coming into Oaxaca.
Yeah.
I know that you have Bacardi now has a marca, and Cuervo has a marca, and some celebrities from around the world are coming in.
Kim Kardashian.
How is that changing how much of the value chain producers are capturing? In other words, I understand that for a long time, mezcaleros have been selling their mezcal to people to bottle it and export it. But do you see more capture of the value chain in terms of the big marcas coming in? And how is that impacting small-scale producers, mezcaleros?
Yeah, I have talked to many of the mezcaleros, and they don't want. Actually, what is happening right now, it is very interesting that the use of intermediaries, they don't want. It is like this narrative that no intermediaries is needed. We want for consumers to go directly to the maestro mezcalero, so they don't need to pay to a middle person to gain money also. But the intermediaries also are needed, But it is like a balance. So I think they don't like the idea of big markets. They don't like this growing. They like the growing of the demand. They don't like the markets, and yes, they are against that. I have seen that. But yes, I don't know if I answered your question, but right now the narrative is no intermediaries needed. So it is better for producers to take their mezcal directly to Mexico City and sell it in a store there, and have this contact with the consumer also directly. And because for example, if the consumer only see the intermediary, only see the market, it obscures the maestro mezcalero and the palenque and all the processors there only see the market. So yes, right now we are going in that direction. I don't know if I answered it, but yeah. And I can answer the other one of the sustainability later.
Yeah, we had one very quick comment on that. It's not a question. Okay.
Thank you. I just want to add something because I think both are great questions. I've been working on this topic for 3 years, and I think it's really like complex situation. You have people who really like to sell their mezcal in a directly way, but also there are some palenqueros who really love to have these people working with them because all the processes for the certification and the money and how you make deals and so on, they need someone to do it. You cannot be in charge of all of that, like you have to produce, you have to do the bureaucracy, you have to sell it, and sometimes they don't even have access to internet, to, different things. So I think, I'd love to have the conversation we talked yesterday or before, and I would love to go deep, but I just wanted to say that it is really complex, that we don't have any right answer, and that in that line of sustainability there are different initiatives to make a certification a part of the appellation of origin, to include local certification, geographical indicators, but like in a smaller scale. And I think it's a hard topic, and it's really, really important to address this situation because appellations of origin are getting really popular in Latin America and Global South. And it's a huge problem because it's a different logic. So I just wanted to say that. Sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you for that last comment. And thank you, Carlo, again for your great presentation. Next up, we have Abigail Martinez Serena on the socio-ecological impact of oil palm, a current and prospective view from the producers of the Marque de Comillas region of Mexico. I hope I pronounced that okay.
Thank you so much. Well, hi everyone. Thank you for being here. I'll be presenting my master's research. And to begin, I would like to start discussing the relevance of this palm oil because it's a cash crop, and it is important because it's demanded by whole world. It's due to the high global demand. The production of this vegetable oil has increased, driving the expansion of its cultivation. Palm oil's high yield per hectare and adaptability make it a profitable crop. Additionally, its versatility as an ingredient used in many everyday products makes it so important to notice. So, in Mexico, cultivation of oil palm is currently in 4 states. But there are some plans from the government to increase to other potential states. So it is important to notice that this is a problem because it's promoted by the government. So now let's focus on, let's see, I can see it. Well, in this graphic, we can see the increasing of planted area and also the production in one state, Chiapas, which is located at the southeast part of Mexico. Chiapas is the largest producer. It was the first state with who started with the production of oil palm, and also the planted area has increased in recent years. So we have different impacts. We have positive and negative, both of them, but we can group in three different dimensions. For example, environmental, economic, and social. Those dimensions are guided by market and also by public policies, and this is something very important because there are another structural ideas that are forcing to change all of these dimensions. Just to mention some of them, for example, we have deforestation, unequal incomes, but also we have gender disparities, and that is so important because in cash crop or in industrial crops, we don't notice the importance of these terms or these impacts. So in Mexico and in Chiapas, the majority of palm oil producers are smallholders. So it is very important because those are the people who were guided by government to start producing this crop. So it is important to know how they perceive and how their experiences are shaping the contribution, are shaping the decisions about the land use change, and also how those experiences are contributing to their future land use plans about this crop. So the general objective is to understand the current state in Chiapas, in a region, and the potential future of oil palm production from the perspective of producers. Now, the study area is located in Chiapas, bordering with Guatemala, and also there is nearest the Montes Azules Biosphere Reserve, which is the last expanse of tropical rainforest, and it supports great biodiversity. In contrast with this region, Marqués de Comillas region, which has passed a lot of land use transformations. So we selected 8 ejidos with similar characteristics, for example, the same age of plantations, and also these ejidos had the same deforestation rates. And for the methods, I just want to mention that we did two seasons of work in the field work, and we used semi-structured interview to understand the perspectives of producers. We interview adult males and females also, and we try to understand different topics. For example, the motivation to start producing palm oil, also the future plans with that, and the participation of women. I'm not going to in so much detail on the analysis process, but it was analyzed using a qualitative software to obtain some codes and then do a code manual to do that in more detail and obtaining a final code manual and codes or subcodes that lend us to understand or to identify patterns and concepts and those relationships. And now we move to the results. For example, we can see, not to focus so much on those aspects, but just to mention that we found that there are many interrelationships between them, and we found that there are some motivations, some environmental, socioeconomic, and future plans. And for example, we found that we could interview more male producers than female because some lack of interest or also traditional issues that we couldn't ask about women participation. But the majority of them are identified as oil palm producers, and the majority, 46%, perceive a good experience with oil palm plantations. The reason because they start planting this crop is because the government launched a program in 2008 to promote and to increase the incomes for those ejidos because they promised to have equal incomes for all of them, and and also to use previous lands which have been degraded. So the majority of them had an agricultural or livestock use, but also, 39% also had primary and secondary forests. And starting with a part of those aspects, the socioeconomic, we found that there are inequality in benefits because not all producers have the same benefits. Smallholders with a few hectares couldn't afford the management and investment in fertilizers, for example, and so they received less payment for each cultivation time. So, for example, now we saw that in different ejidos, there is another factor that is very important because the distance to processor plants is also being a challenge for them, because between more far you are, you receive a less price per ton of fresh fruit, and also if you are close and you are a large producer, you receive better prices because you have the access to the information and you don't need intermediaries. About the environmental aspect, in what are the resources that they consider they need to establish palm oil plantations, we saw that the proximity to water bodies is better because they consider that this resource is helping to the soil and helping to the fertility and the growing of the palm plantations. But also the fertilizer is something very important in all of them because the soil conditions are different. Some of them are with low nutrients, so it is important that. Yes, we move faster to this slide. When we ask about the conservation of how they notice the impact on the environmental aspects, they said that there were no difference between before and after the plantation, because they mentioned that they already try to conserve what they have. And for example, here we have a graph. We saw that the only ejido with a high conservation status is Boca de Chajul, because they start in the same year as the program of oil palm. There was another program named Payment for Environmental Services. So this program helps to conserve and to pay an amount for farmers to not convert that land, but the rest of ejidos are in low conservation status because they don't have common use lands to preserve, or they are not focusing on that. And about the future perspectives, this is quite interesting because we have that the majority of them are thinking to replanting in a future because they think that the soil is adapted to the roots, to the plant. So they think also that the income is constant and is different to another crops that they have, or to farming, for example, to livestock, for example. But also they are not thinking in another alternatives, and also many of them feel proud about being oil palm producers. So they are thinking to replanting because of their results. And about the spending issue, this is very interesting because we have two different types of producers: the small producers and the medium and large. The small producers doesn't have the support necessary to start planting in another land. They need plants, they need fertilizers, they need money, but they don't have the support that the government gave them at the first time. So there is more difficult for them in this moment to expand their plantations. But also the medium and large, they are the opposite. They have the money, they have the opportunity, they have the access to information to continue expanding, and they are planning to do that. So also there are something important that there is that the private sector is now pushing small producers and medium and large producers to continue expanding and to replanting because they need more land to be planted. Just quickly, the participation of women, as I mentioned, it was low because of difficulties in the ejidos, but also we have that there is asymmetrical work. As we know, many industrial crops makes that women are unpaid because of those activities. Also, there is their caregiving work, and not only for familiar people. They have to care workers when they are hurt because of the palm plantations, and the few women which participate directly on the plantation, they receive low and occasional payments, and this payment is not enough for them to feel that are contributing to the home. Instead of this is seen as a complementary income, which is not enough for them.
And also, they participate in dangerous activities. I mean, they are the people that are applying fertilizers and they don't know what is the effect of fertilizers because they don't have protection on it, and this is the easy activity for them to do. And some of the interviewed women are leadership, are owner of their own plantations, and this is important because they have another perspective of how to treat the plantations, to care more about their soil, to do in some small pots, not to do big land of plantations. And the collaboration is not present in this region, in opposite to other regions. For example, in the coast of Chiapas, it is also because the cultural ideas that they have. And just finally, I want to mention that it's important to understand that the benefits sometimes, on the majority of times, is not equal for everyone. That each context is different. Each one of them needs different things. We need to know what they ask for, what the requirements they wanting, and how the environmental conditions are also an important force or an important aspect that we have to consider. The access to information is very important overall for small producers, and the part about the alignment of government programs is really important because there is no this part of there is no an agreement on what to do with production, but also with conservation. Accentuates inequality is present in this crop, and also the expansion is continuing and is not guided as at the beginning by the government, it's guided by private sector. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Abigail. You know, when people talk about palm oil, we're often thinking of a global context in Indonesia, Malaysia, West Africa. And so I really appreciate your study going deep into what this means for the front lines of expansion of palm oil in Mexico. So thanks for sharing that. Do we have any questions from the audience for Abigail?
Hi, thanks for a really interesting talk about oil palm expansion. Super important topic. So some ethnographic research that I did on narco trafficking and deforestation in Central America, in Guatemala, in El Salvador, in where else? Nicaragua. I didn't do fieldwork in Honduras, but some of my other colleagues did. Narco traffickers were involved with almost every oil palm plantation that we came across and folks that we interviewed, like directly landing planes of coca into the plantations, using them as money laundering activities. And my question is that happening in Chiapas as well? I mean, I know you studied ejidos, so maybe it's a totally different context when you're working with small producers. But my question is, are you seeing that sort of organized crime governance in super large oil palm plantations happening in Chiapas? And also, if you don't feel comfortable commenting on it, you can just say something else, which I totally get to.
Thank you so much for the question. That is very important because it's another factor that I don't mention, but it occurs on, well, I just heard by the interviewees, but I couldn't see because as you mentioned, I couldn't go to the plantations. But the smallholders mentioned that in their plantations there are no those kind of things. But another thing, I couldn't interview large oil palm producers because the majority are from the narco or are from the big companies. So it's difficult to interact with them, and it was dangerous. It's their reality. So I think that difficulty to be approached to ask or to do some studies in those plantations is because of that maybe. It's difficult because the region is difficult now. It has a lot of violence in this moment, so it's difficult to go back and to do some work afterward. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for a great talk. My question is, you had this really interesting comment on smallholders having difficulty in expanding, incrementing their production, whereas medium scale farmers were able to, or had better opportunity. And given that this is placed in ejidos, which is probably a simplification to say land is held in common, but there's some aspect of that. I'm wondering, has the introduction of a global commodity created sort of new agreements or disagreements on land and its allocation within the heroes?
Well, the problem, thank you for your question. The problem is that in the heroes, they have different trajectory in the land use chains. So they have tried to use different from traditional to other crops to try to obtain benefits. But the problem is that the conditions of the soil, of the environment, of the zone in which they are, it's being a limit to decide to continue with traditional crops, for example. And the introduction of this crop was something seen not as something interrupting their culture. It was more like a necessity and an option, an opportunity to increase income. And I mean income not for being wealthy or to have a lot of money, just income to eat or to cover basic necessities. So it was it's something from other part is not of the traditional crops, but it's something because of a necessity it came. And this is a problem because in Mexico, by the government, this crop is seen as it's named Palma Mexicana, so it's seen like a priority crop. So this is a problem because it's in the mind of people. It's better to plant this than other traditional crops.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Abigail, for your work. So next up, last but not least, we have Jan Lepolain de World. Pronunciation okay? Yeah, sorry.
All right. Hello, everyone. Let me just take this. Okay, great. And then start. All right. So I was very happy to hear about land acquisitions because I'm going to talk about the people doing the land acquisitions. Are you hearing my? Is this loud enough? I am not super used to this. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the people behind these land acquisitions. And we've heard about the importance of stories and narratives in different ways over this conference. And I'm going to talk about the stories and narratives that they tell themselves and the world about what they do and how to justify what they do. And I'll tell you why I think that matters. Just briefly, how we came to this. So Angela Kronenberg, who lives and works in Mozambique, and I have had conversations because we've been working in land investment and land change frontiers over the years, and mostly looking at material dimensions of the dynamics of expansion of agriculture in these frontiers. But through conversations, we were realizing the importance of a discursive dimension of what was going on there, and we wanted to investigate that a bit more. So that's how this mostly comes about. So the premise here is that people doing the investment of these large-scale land acquisitions or land grabs or whatever we want to name it, they're taking risks in doing these investments, and they're calculating these risks. They're thinking about the potential for profits, typically, and in the context of the places they're investing in. These risks arguably are largely material, but they're also at some level reputational and moral. There is a risk that they're going to do something that's going to be sanctioned as a bad thing for social or environmental reasons. And that can be important for their bottom line if they're selling to Europe or whatnot, but it can also be important for their own perception of themselves as human beings. And we sort of go from the premise that everyone sort of wants to think they're a good person, and we can discuss whether that's actually true, but that's a bit of a premise here, whether they are or not. So it's even more of a tension and a pressure in a context where you have increased attention in those frontiers on the environmental and social dimensions of what's happening there. He talks about land grabs and deforestation. One thing we're discussing here is the role of intermediaries in the helping people think about all that, and I'll explain how. So when we think about brokers and intermediaries, this is something Angela and I were talking about, and it seems not discussed quite enough. Those are people who buy and sell land. They often sell services as well to investors. They make a link between investors and the places they invest in by translating, mediating between those two. And they often advertise regions for investment as great places to put your money, great profits to be made, often very charismatic people in our experience. And we argue that they don't only manage material risks, but they also manage what we call these moral risks and reputational risks through narratives and discourse. So our questions here are, what are the stories that these investors tell themselves to basically sleep at night and also tell the rest of the world to justify what they're doing? And what is the role of these brokers, intermediaries, in shaping and disseminating these narratives? So briefly, the methods, we've both conducted a lot of interviews with investors over the years, not originally with that goal in mind, so we revisited all that. Also interviews with intermediaries, also looking at materials such as social media posts and publications by these brokers, and we did a regular qualitative analysis of all of that to come up with some answers. So I'm going to talk about two dimensions here, narratives that are about what things are or how they think things are really, and then narratives about what things should be, so sort of normative narratives. I'm going to give you some quotes. Most of them are slightly or a lot offensive in some ways. These are how people talk about places, people. Not always nice, but that's I'm trying to represent here what they talk about. I spare you the most offensive ones, don't be too worried. So one thing you hear people talk about is what was there when they invested, or what is there before they invest. And it's often a talk about how there was nothing. This is a terra nullius narrative, right? There was nothing, it was just brush. The environment was worthless, there weren't a lot of people, etc., etc. So you have these stories about what is there, and it's often not a lot, right? Then you have stories about people. And similarly, there's a sort of discounting of what is there before you arrive as an investor. And so the people there, yeah, they live there, but they're not really productive. They don't really do anything. They don't really have a work culture. They're not modern, etc. So without us, they die of hunger, etc. Right? So I'm imagining this ruffles you a little bit, but this is how you hear in private people talk about people in those places. And then they also talk about themselves and their role, right, as investors. And you hear a lot of these sort of triumphant narratives about how everyone thought I was really crazy. I went to this remote place and put a lot of money there, and they thought I was crazy. I was going to lose all my money, but in the end, I was proven right. It worked out. I made a lot of money, and so this they thought I was crazy. Narrative is very strong. And generally a sort of perception of being a leader, being an innovator is very strong. So just to go back to these three here, we've got to talk about frontier territories, the places where these people invest, as empty of people, empty of either nature altogether or anything just of real value, and lacking of development, lacking in development, backwards, dormant, stagnant, etc. So it's a way of discounting what's there before the investment. And then you got to talk about local people, often as inefficient and therefore in need of sort of modernization, resistant to change, lacking a work culture, often also as not that good for the environment. Therefore, it's okay if we lose their practices, incompatible with modernity. Again, a discounting of what's there before investment. And then the investors themselves. We call them, this narrative, like lonely leaders. They're leading the way of development and modernization, even in the face of hostile governments, of a hostile civil society often. But they're still doing it because they're courageous, self-sacrificing. They have stories about ancestors being pioneers and themselves kind of continuing that tradition. It's in their blood. They're entrepreneurs at heart. And mostly they're good people, so they say, and they point to a few that are actually doing it wrong to justify that they're doing it right. So, brokers, intermediaries are public-facing. They're people who are trying to sell investors a place, a possibility, a dream of a place to invest in, and they're very visible, so they can be quite as dismissive and negative and outrageous, frankly, sometimes, as what you hear in private. And so they'll give it all of this is sort of a positive spin. Frontiers are not completely empty, but they're full of potential. They're full of space. There's space for everyone. People are, they're not just backwards, but actually they're manipulated by NGOs and outsiders and Westerners and whatnot. The territories are not underdeveloped. They're on the cusp of the development. They're about to explode and be rich, and therefore you want to invest there. Okay, so it's sort of a positive spin because they're public-facing, because they can be quite as blatantly dismissive. So then all of this kind of is composed into narratives that are more normative about how things should be. And let me see where I'm at here. Okay. So we hear things about the need to develop, the need to provide work, the need for investors also to contribute to that sort of modernization. Things like, we're a good company, we give work to the people around us. We hear things about the need to change and modernize and the place of local people in that process. And so often converging around an idea that we can't stay in the past, we can't continue doing the things that were being done. People have to change whether they want it or not. And trying to keep sort of traditional livelihoods is just plain wrong because you're actually keeping people in poverty, is what we hear a lot, right? Narratives about just global development and needs for food production globally. So, we need to feed the world. How many times have I heard people producing soybeans and beef at the expense of forests in the Chaco saying, well, we've got to feed the world. This is what we're doing, and therefore it's right. And then sort of narratives about what sustainable development means as a specific kind of sustainability that's pretty narrow. So briefly, because I'm probably going to run slightly over time. Sorry. So this kind of coalesces around four axes, a development imperative. So I've gone over this a little bit already. So we need food. People locally needs to be developed. We don't really ask them if they want to, but that's the idea. And investors are really the best people to do that and conduct that development. Local people have a very specific place in that process, and that place is becoming a sort of subaltern participant in that development, integrating the frontier economy, but not necessarily as the drivers of it. And then right way of doing things. So there are right and wrong ways of doing that frontier development. It should be orderly, it should be planned. Often people point to past investors saying, well, before it was the Wild West, people did whatever, but now we respect the rules, we're orderly, we have plans, etc. And people should be honest, should treat their workers well. So there's a set of values there that are mobilized. And then ideas of sustainability, mostly really as preserving soils, right? Sustainability, environment is just keeping soils, and farmers are said to be incentivized to preserve soils because they're saying, this is my capital, why would I ever damage the soils, right? And there's a lot of reasons why, but that's the argument, right? So why would I ever? Therefore, we're by definition sustainable. When there's mention of biodiversity, it's usually to say that investments are compatible in some ways. There's a lot of greenwashing, saying, pastures actually store as much carbon as forests, and so on. So you hear all those things. So, okay, I don't have much time for this, but again, brokers put a positive spin on all this, right? They're trying to be, hey, it's not all negative. I'm going to say the same thing, but in a kind of nice, positive, forward-looking, upward-looking way, so that it's acceptable and I can put it in newspapers and I can be on TV talking about this. So overall, the argument here is that all of this kind of comes together as what we call a moral economy of frontier investments, borrowing from the use that Wendy Wolford makes of that term moral economy as a sort of idea, a set of ideas of how resources should be organized between actors in society, and especially land. And so we've got a set of ideas about, what land is, what people are, what investors are, what their roles are, that kind of come together as a series of normative narratives about, development, sustainability, the right way or wrong way of doing things. And we've got our middlemen, brokers, pushing these narratives, shaping them, and sort of massaging them to make them acceptable towards society. And so my summary here is that frontiers of investment, of land investment expansion are places of pretty strong moral tensions around sustainability, social impacts, and to ease those moral tensions for themselves, but also towards others and potential critiques, people are playing a whole game, a discursive game of downplaying the costs of what they're doing socially, environmentally, and upselling the benefits. And brokers, we argue, are a key actor in both shaping these stories, but also kind of selling them and disseminating them towards the rest of society. And so in that sense, they kind of build this dream of a morally just and justified frontier of investments that can then be communicated and sold to investors, but also to the rest of society in places like, case that I know, Chaco, Paraguay, where there is a desire to hear these stories and for the government to be able to say, yes, this is what we're doing, we're developing, we're modernizing, and there's no cost to it, it's all great, right? So I guess, and I'm going to stop here, but we can think then about whether there are leverage points too at the discursive level, which is something I haven't finished thinking about, but I think is interesting to ponder. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Jan. That was amazing and unfortunately resonated with my experience in lots of ways. So thank you for that work. We'll start here with questions.
Hi, thank you, Jan. Really amazing presentation. I was a little surprised to see the need by these frontier people in justifying sustainability, because in some of the contexts I work in, that wasn't. I feel like people not necessarily have this moral tension, because that wasn't a broader debate about sustainability. For example, in some parts of Bolivia. So I'm just curious if you see any national variation in,
Yeah, thank you. Well, actually, that's interesting, because that's where one place where I don't have the space here to talk about all the differences, but Angela and I had different observations. For example, she said in Mozambique it's just not a thing. So all these observations actually apply mostly to the Chaco, and this is because, and I can see the differences that could be with Bolivia, because there has been by now a fair amount of critique of deforestation focused on the Chaco, and thinking, Paraguay has these incredible rates of deforestation. And it's at this point, it's been pretty well publicized outside. There are NGOs, there's a lot of denunciation, there's like, also, the social aspect, there's, English NGOs working on the protection of indigenous people in these contexts and stuff. So it's more visible, and I think, therefore, more present for them as something they have to justify.
Yeah, great talk. I was 20 years ago when I was doing research in the Amazon during the height of the environmental movement in the Amazon. People had exactly the same discourse, very defensive. But if you travel to the Amazon today, after especially the Bolsonaro government, the very right-wing government, they were very empowered. Now they're saying, well, we're going to kill environmentalists here. So how do you see this power dynamics and looking into the future, and particularly with the right-wing drift in several societies, as we saw the talk this morning? How do you think that narrative might change in the future?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question for which I don't really have an answer. I think one thing that does change is, well, I do wonder about how important is this, right? I think it does explain some amount of variation or something, but it's hard to measure, right? How much does narratives actually matter? And I do think that with political changes, well, we're seeing that in Argentina now too, right? A right-wing shift, it does embolden people in a way that they might not feel a need to justify things as much. So that's where I don't really know the answer. I'm not sure, and I guess I'm curious to see over time if I go back and talk to some of those people at some point. There is though a personal dimension too, in the sense that, okay, so like I'm thinking, for example, Uruguayan investors in Paraguay, there's a lot of them. Those are often people who are staying in Uruguay. They might visit the field once a year, maybe, and they have intermediaries working with them. I don't think they want to be actively doing harm to people locally. And the game there is obfuscating the reality of what's happening so that they can do their thing and feel good about it. But so I don't know if that really changes as much as, maybe the environmental sustainability discourses, like that's less of a pressure in the future. But the personal ethics, I think, is a factor somewhere in there, and I don't know how much, I don't know how lasting that is.
Again, thanks for the presentation, great presentation. I was just wondering how homogeneous is this moral economy? And maybe to pick towards what you were going in the end of these kind of leveraging points for discursive, is there other types of discursive narratives going around that are a bit more hopeful?
What was the first part? Sorry, how
homogeneous is
homogeneous. Okay, yeah. Well, okay, so homogeneous and hopeful or not. Okay, well, it's not entirely homogeneous, and especially since we're talking about two different contexts. I didn't spend much time talking about that, but Angela works in northern Mozambique. That's a different context. So there is variation, but there's a surprising amount of convergence. And when we talk about this sort of moral economy overall, I guess the idea is that there is a sort of coherence to it. And people draw different parts from it. They don't necessarily agree with all of that discursive whole, but they do draw from something that's somewhat coherent and consistent. At least that's our argument, but I could see people pushing back against that too. In terms of hopefulness, I mean, to some extent, their narratives have a future-looking and hopeful dimension that what they're doing is actually good, and the modernization of local people is necessary, and feeding the world is good, and they're doing it. So for them, it's hopeful. Do I feel hope when I hear all that? Not really, but I'm going to go ahead and say I don't find the Chaco to be a very hopeful place to work in. I might change my mind on that, but for the moment, that's how I feel about it.
We have one last question. I saw more hands than time, unfortunately, so I think you'll definitely get some visitors after.
Okay, thank you again for the super interesting and very depressing, in my personal opinion, talk. I mean, it's logical, it makes sense, there's this whole economy, I get it, it's marketing. I was wondering a bit, so now you communicate a lot about the overlap and what you find, these people to communicate between these two very different regions today, but I would be interested in hearing if you have thought about on how this emerged. And I don't really know about the Chaco at all, and Angela knows a lot about Mozambique, but I think in Mozambique the case was that actually the government institutionalized this type of interface for private investors, doing this type of land transaction, basically enabling a government-driven platform to, in my words, rip off people by doing land transactions that are basically quite unfair. So the question would be, do you see differences in how this emerged? I mean, how this was institutionalized and why these people are there? And then also, and that links a bit to Anna's work, what is actually happening after these types of transactions have taken place, as we have seen now and heard also in previous talks about failures of these land investments, which are empirically disproving the narrative of, for example, these inefficient land users, the local people, they don't really know how to manage the land properly and we can make more out of it. No, you can't. So just to ask it.
Okay, yeah. So the first part of your question about how these processes or how these frontiers really emerge in those two places, it's a big question in the sense that there's a lot to say about it, and it's going to be very different in Mozambique and in the Chaco. I mean, we've discussed in other places, both of us separately, like the processes leading to these frontiers. And there's, in the case of the Chaco, there's a soy boom that had a lot of influence, capital being reinjected, privatization of land in different instances in the 3 different countries. So that could be a whole maybe discussion. So I'm just gonna. Sorry, do you have a follow-up? Okay, who are they? Where did they come from? So I can talk better about the Chaco on that. These are a mix of actors, but they're generally capitalized actors coming from outside the Chaco. That is, in some instances, the bigger cities or the core agricultural regions around the Chaco, so the Pampas in Argentina. There's a lot of regional mobility, so again, Brazilians in Paraguay, Uruguayans in Paraguay, Argentines reinjecting capital in Bolivia, in the Chaco, Chiquinquirá region. And those are a lot of investors that have ties outside of agriculture too. So you've got a lot of manufacturing companies reinvesting in land, stuff like that. So I don't know if that's okay. Yeah, we can continue that. And so in terms of what happens after, there too the difference is going to be important between Mozambique and the Chaco, because according to what Angela tells me, there are quite a few failed investments in Mozambique, much more than in the Chaco. The Chaco is more of a sweeping wave of conversion, and I haven't seen a lot of conversion back to anything else than cattle ranching and soybeans and other crops in the Chaco.
Okay, I think we're over the hour, so I don't want to hold everyone back from coffee or food. Thank you for attending, and one final thank you to our set of speakers.